Welcome back, everyone. This drawing is going to be about essentially drawing tone. And in this assignment we will be drawing an egg. And to approach this egg you will use shape, tones, and edges. Those will be the three steps or three layers in describing this. On your sheet of paper, the first thing you were asked to do is to create a tonal chart, so that you basically created a column. It has 7 1x1 inch squares, and then the first one is the white of the paper, then your 4H, 2H, HB, 2B, 4B, 6B pencil. And you notice that they gradate from light to dark. So these are the particular pencils that you'll be using for this particular assignment. Now, I know some of you for my course at least, may have some other pencils. You may have like a 6H, you might have an 8B, some other ones. So you're more than welcome to use those as well, but these will be the basic range of pencils we'll be using to create that particular object. All right. So your still life is just a single egg on a dark piece of fabric. It should be lit by a strong light, and so I have a small desk lamp over here that's pointing this way. It's about a 45-degree angle. And you notice that it illuminates the egg strongly over here. Over here the egg goes into shadow, and then here's the cast shadow on the dark surface from the egg. And then you notice, hopefully you can see it, that because the egg is a light object and the surface here is dark, that it contrasts it. So if you notice the edge on this side more so, it's a strong edge, meaning that it's hard lined, and over here it's more soft because you have the shadow here. Okay. All right. So to get started, you're also going to want all those pencils. So I have them here. You're also going to want probably this eraser for small detail works, and then the white eraser. And then some of you, will have a preference for, we also have the kneaded eraser and the pink eraser as well. Alright, so to get started, I suggest using one of your B scale pencils, and I'm going to go ahead and use the HB. And the first thing I want to do is, now I'm going to be drawing the egg from this point of view. Now you guys are seeing it from straight down, but for the most part, what's going to be different for you guys is that I will have the shadow diagnosed a little bit differently because of my point of view. Alright, so just want to give you a heads up, a disclaimer about that. So the first part is to hold the pencil like you're going to sketch, and you want to draw your egg about life size or bigger. If you go a little bit bigger, it's a little bit easier. And you use just a rounding, sweeping line, real similar to the kind of approach when we were drawing the ellipses in session 10. So as using that rounding, sweeping line, as I'm looking and I'm diagnosing, so the line starts to get darker and darker as I go around it. And I'm really looking at the shape of this. So what's interesting, at one end the egg is more rounded, more like a ball, and at the other end, this end, it becomes more pointed, or it's a little bit more narrow. Alright, so I got the general shape in of the egg itself. Now I'm going to look to see where the cast shadow is and its shape and how it stretches away from the egg. And then where along this edge does it start over here, and then where along the edge over here does it stop. So just looking at that, here's where it stops, and about here is where it starts. And then just looking at the direction of that cast shadow, and then lightly laying that in as well. So there's that. And then you notice there's like an arc right here. Okay, so when you're drawing your shadow shapes on this object, notice that this object is round, so you wouldn't want to draw that shadow shape straight across. You would want to round with it. So that goes kind of back to when we were doing cross contour lines. Really look at where it rounds. So I noticed that it rounds, it starts up here, and then when it rounds, it ends a little bit past where my cast shadow is. I'm just going to lightly put that in. And when I'm working on the egg, I want to go really light, because I know that the egg overall, it's a white object, and so the kind of shadow work or shading values, that tones that I'm going to be doing on the egg need to remain light. So the sort of the linear sketch lines, I want to also keep those light. All right, so I have from this light source over here, the highlight is roughly here. It is a really strong reflected light from the light over here, the bulb, and then there's a slight shape right here that's light, and it's coming from the light source that's over here. So I have a bank of lights on the ceiling that's probably 6 to 8 feet away. So I'm just going to lightly outline that this is slightly lighter right here. And then I also notice that there's a slight lightening of the value right here. Okay? So this is where your observation skills really need to be dialed in, and you're just looking to see what's going on. Now hopefully the camera can show it, but right here to about here, the edge of the cast shadow is really sharp. So the transition from the shadow to out here is very abrupt, so it's sharp. But as the shadow stretches out here away from the object, not only does it get lighter, but it also fades and gets more soft along this edge. And then it's really dark in here. So looking at that shape, I'm going to kind of break it up. It's really dark in here, and then out here it gets lighter. Alright, so again, I'm just using the sketch line to break up this shape and then break up the egg shape to create the composition. Alright, now I have an overall value for the background now, which is out here, and then I have a value, 3 different values that are going on in the cast shadow, and then I have about, about 1, 2, 3, 3.5 to 4 values that are going to be really light in between each other on the actual egg shape. So once everything's sketched in, I can squint my eyes to help simplify the values that I'm seeing, or the tones, and then I can use a compare contrast using this chart. What would be the most appropriate pencil right now to deal with my background? Okay, so that's a really good question. So looking, and if I want, I could kind of bring my chart out there, so it might be easier to remove the page from the actual sketchbook, and you can bring it out here and use it again. So, looking out here, this is probably going to be like a heavy 2B out here, maybe a medium 4B. So what I can do is I can start assigning that. So 2B, 4B, and you just do this really lightly. In here it's going to be a dark 4B, a light 6B, and then a really dark 6B. And then within the egg, kind of breaking it up, it's going to be like a 2H, 4H for these highlights, and then out here it'll be a fading 2H. Okay, I'm going to bring that up closer so you can see that. So I've just kind of almost created like color by numbers per se. Alright, so think of it that way. And what that does is it kind of helps me now just figure out what pencils I want to use to dictate those areas. So let's go ahead and start with the background. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start laying in the background in one direction using that cross-hatching direction. So I'm going to go horizontally. And as I'm doing this, I want to attempt to use the same amount of pressure so that knowing that my pencil lines, when I'm using this back and forth stroke, will overlap, that the overlap won't be too obnoxious. If that makes sense. So I'm using really light pressure and a 2B pencil in a horizontal direction, laying in the background value. So I finished the sketch or the shape layer, and now I'm moving on to the tone layer. Oh, and you might want to erase your lettering before you go over it. Again, when you label these areas, you don't have to do that. I just did that so you guys can see it's one approach to kind of setting up your brain to go, okay, this is what we're doing now here in this little place, okay, Daryl? You know, so you can have a conversation with yourself. So this is really similar to my video where we're doing the value chart. It's just this is on a larger scale, so instead of being a 1 inch by 1 inch square, it's now the background to the still life. So I'm hoping that as you start to do this, that you really pay attention to your pencil control. So that means the amount of pressure you're exerting on the tip, as well as overlapping your back and forth strokes so that you don't create any major obnoxious darker areas, that it all starts to take on a single value. Okay? Alright, so the question will come up, how do I deal with not going outside of my border? So what you can do is you can take a piece of paper and put a piece of paper up to that edge just like this, and then basically as you're shading in, just go past it, but this secondary piece of paper is lying on that line. So if I take it away, you can see that this edge stays nice and crisp and clean, and you don't have to run it with your eraser. So I can just do that all the way down here. Now don't press too hard, otherwise you will actually snag the paper. Let me just hit this real quick. And it's okay to go over areas a couple of times. And all you're doing is you're trying to just satisfy by filling it in with an overall tone as you layer. Alright, I'm not going to go completely to the edges. I just want to get around the shape of the egg for the purposes of the video, because I'm sure watching me do this is already starting to get old, because it's just the same thing, filling in. Same thing over here. Let me do that real quick. And you probably see that I'm attempting to rush through this, and you probably notice that with me rushing through this, I tend to get a little sloppy. So just be careful that you're not defaulting to being sloppy, because then if you start to take on that as a habit, then a lot of times your drawings will have a certain slop factor to them, as they say. Alright, so there's the first layer for the background. Now I could change the direction and then do another layer. So let me just go diagonally. And you can see that how that starts to change. And you probably noticed that every so often I move my hand, and so you might be thinking, well, now that I'm starting to put down value, I can use this sheet of paper as well as a shield underneath my drawing hand, and what that will do is it will prevent my drawing hand from smudging this buildup of graphite around, especially into the egg, because I want the egg to stay relatively light because it's such a light object. So by using this shield, it will keep my drawing hand from smudging. Alright, so I'm kind of running the edge of the egg, and you probably noticed that if you look at the outline right now I have, the sketch line rather, around the egg is pretty light, right? But as I start to darken the background, you notice that the egg's edge starts to pop, so that the transition between the background and the egg, it starts to be very apparent. So as you're doing this, do not default to just taking your pencil and going and outline it heavily. You don't need it. So now that, because this is a perceptual drawing class, we're drawing from life, we want this drawing to move in the direction of being photoreal. And when we look at this egg, you notice there's no hardcore outline around this object. None at all. Nor is there a hardcore outline around this cast shadow. So don't draw what you think you see. Draw what you see. So don't put a strong outline around this. Just let this outside value meet this inside value, and then that's enough to show the transition. You don't need to enforce that transition between this value and that value with a strong black outline. It's not necessary. So that's one of the things in tonal drawing or value drawings, is that you start to negate your line work. So even though we started this drawing as a sketch, eventually through these steps, these layers, all line information will be either destroyed, covered up, or hidden. Okay, so I hope you kind of get the point on the background. And as I start to build it up, so I'll probably do a couple more layers just to get this tone right here. All right. So for the sake of keeping you guys from going crazy and bored, I'm going to switch now to the cast shadow for the egg. Okay. So I have my indications here. I'm going to go ahead and do those verbatim. So the first one, the one that's the farthest one out, is the 4B pencil. So I'm going to use the 4B pencil. If I can find the 4B pencil. Oh, there it is. Okay. So with my 4B pencil, I am now going to basically fill in this particular shape. I'm using medium pressure, and I know that it's darker than the background, so I'm going to go a little bit more heavier handed. but I don't want to go with full pressure because remember I was telling you how the shadow out here, it fades, it gets lighter, but the edge is also soft. So if I go too heavy too quickly, I lose the ability to create a soft edge out here that fades. Alright, so that's roughly roughed in the 4B. Now I'm going to slightly cross it and go in a different direction. And that's just to kind of streamline the tone I created and to also kind of tame up the linear back and forth stroke marks. So just changing the angle slightly to create that effect. Okay, now these other two spots are 6B, so I'm going to switch to my 6B, and the one that's outlying here I'm going to use kind of medium to light pressure. And when you guys especially use your 6B and your 4B, you'll notice that they're soft, so they'll wear down a lot quickly. So make sure that as you're using the back and forth stroke to land the tone, that every so often you just give your pencil a little bit of a turn, and what that will do is it will help retain the point longer, and then you don't have to sharpen it as often. Okay, and then I'm going to slightly cross over it with that cross-hatching technique and put then another layer of 6B on top of 6B, just like I did with the 4B. So you'll find that you were using the cross-hatching, in your scale here, your chart, but you'll find that out here, let's say in the field, it'll be a lot more freer and less constricted, because here you have to kind of stay within the square. Here you can get away from the square. Okay, so there's that 6B layer. Now I'm going to go into this 6B that's really dark and that it's close up to the egg. So I'm going to lightly, along the egg's edge, dictate where that's going to start, and then using medium pressure in this first initial layer, I'm going to go a little bit more heavier handed. And when I'm done with this layer, you should be able to see a difference between the two. So laying in the value that's closest to the egg, it's also the darkest. And then I'm going to cross it. And by crossing it, I can kind of clean up the lines from the first initial back and forth strokes. And I can pay a little more closer attention to the edge of the egg down here. And then I can also make it more uniform. Okay, so here I've kind of broken up the shadow. It's dark right up here against the egg, and as it moves away it starts to fade. I'm going to sharpen up this edge here So you see how I run that line? So there's now an outline, and then I'm going to take that outline and blend it back into the cast shadow. So I basically rub into it and then drag it in, dragging it in. And you see how that line on this side loses its outline anatomy, and then it's basically dissolves into this shape. Okay. Alright, so there's the tones for the cast shadow for now. So now I'm going to put that on the back burner. And now I'm going to go into the egg. So the first thing I want to do is just, what I can do is, if I can't remember what I did in the egg, I can have a sheet of paper off to the side here, and I can label real quick what I have in my drawing. Okay, and then by doing that, I can then erase the text, because I don't want the text to show up in my drawing, and I know this is going to be a really light object, so I don't want it to show up. I'm also going to slightly lighten that defining arc line as well as around my highlight where I indicate it. So I can still see it. You may not be able to see it anymore, but I can still see it. Alright, now I'm going to start with the 4H pencil and deal with the 4H areas. Okay? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to lay in a light 4H layer for half of the egg. So using a kind of a diagonal direction, light pressure, and the 4H pencil, I'm going to move just a little bit slower, and what I want to attempt to do is get some really nice overlapping back and forth strokes with this light pressure, and then fill in this part of the egg. So it's always easy to make things darker. It's a little bit more difficult to lighten areas. You can do it with your eraser by either diluting it, you can fully erase it out, try it again, or you can also use your eraser to almost blot it, almost like you're blotting a stain in the carpet where you dumped your coffee. And what it does is it makes it lighter. Okay, again, I'm running this 4H on this side of the egg along up to this arc line. Just like that. And now I'm going to slightly go in a different direction to tame my back and forth strokes. But I'm using extremely light pressure, so I'm just kind of moving the pencil back and forth, almost just dragging it. And it's going to tame, it's going to put this really light layer over and then tame those back and forth strokes. So the lighter you go and the more layers, the more of a streamlined look you can achieve. If you go too dark too quickly, it'll have a real sketchy, kind of harsh, raw look to it. Alright, so I have 2 layers of 4H here. Now I'm going to come in with the 2H and then deal with these areas right here that I showed. So along with looking at the egg, so here it's dark, and then it's dark here, but remember there's kind of a highlight down on this side. Now you guys probably can't see it because I'm again looking at it from this point of view and you're looking at it from this point of view. So I'm going to use the 2H to go around those slightly lighter areas. So I'm layering over the 4H to darken the egg, and then wherever I leave the 4H alone, I don't layer over it, those will be basically taking care of those slightly lighter areas. Alright, so right here it's staying light, and right here it's staying light. Alright, so now I have my strong highlight right here. And what I want to do is I want to fade the 2H towards that. Now it's really brilliantly illuminated here, but right here is the most brightest area. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my 2H and then lightly bring it towards the highlight, but I'm using extremely light pressure and overlapping back and forth strokes towards the highlight. And I slightly cross it. And then as I work into this area, I'm hardly pressing at all. It's like the pencil's just being kind of pushed across the surface of the paper. And it's just kissing it. Just slightly, ever so slightly putting a tone down. Again, I'm not even pressing anymore. And I'm basically surrounding the highlight shape. Change my angle. And I know you're probably thinking he keeps going over the same areas, and what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get my pencil to blend and tame down the linear back and forth strokes, while at the same time trying to keep the value somewhat lighter. So again, going really light. Okay. And then I noticed that when I kind of take a step back and assess it, I can see this is really glowing. This is lighter than this. So now I need, and you guys could probably see this arc line. So now I'm going to go back into the darker area of the egg as I'm looking at the egg. and I want to make the arc just a little bit more softer. So I'm kind of using the pencil as a blending tool to soften that edge, and then I come back into this area using a little bit more pressure to darken it. Alright, so I'm going to put a back burner on the egg now, and I'm going to come in with my, let's see, with the 2B, and then continue the background and start working around the egg. And what that will do is it'll make the egg's overall shape apparent. It'll also make the values inside that I've done on the egg also more apparent. So remember, I went originally in a horizontal line, and then I started doing this diagonal, so I'm going to do that. So I've just jumped back to the background. So I'm still in the tone layer per se, and I'm kind of at the end of the tone layer, and by what I'm doing now is kind of moving into the edge layer, where now I want to make the edge of the egg more present. And so what I'm doing is, without heavily outlining the egg to separate it from the background, I'm just making the background's tone darker. And it is darker. You can see how dark it is. But I haven't quite made that dark tone here in the drawing yet. So now I'm doing that. So what's nice about this tonal drawing is you can jump back and forth to different areas depending on how you're feeling and, you know, how things are shaping up. So if you feel that, you know, you've had enough with the background and you want to take a break, okay, now I'll go back and work on the egg. You can do that. So as I start to darken the background, you notice this edge of the egg becomes more apparent. And again, I haven't outlined anything. It's just when the two values meet, that's what completes the separation, the transition between the shape and the background, or the surface that it's sitting on. So kind of working this back end of the cast shadow and just kind of blending the background into it. And what that does is it helps create and strengthen the fade that the shadow has on that dark surface. I can actually take the 2B and go into the cast shadow and use it to, per se, blend the darker 6B more into the paper's surface. And then by blending it, it makes it more softer and less grainy looking. So you guys will notice this as you're drawing, especially with the B pencils on your drawing paper, because your drawing paper has a slight tooth to it. the B pencils have a tendency to really fill up the higher areas of the tooth in the paper, and it gives it a real grainy look. But if you use one of the harder pencils as a blending tool, you can actually press or push those softer B pencils into the surface of the paper, giving it a softer look, and then it loses that grainy look. Okay. So now my egg is becoming more apparent as I start to darken my background. And what's great, like I said, it's easier to make things darker than it is to make things lighter. So knowing that, and if you use this pursuit of layers, multiple layers, you can slowly work up the value to what you're actually seeing. Okay? If you work too dark too quickly, a lot of times what you'll find is that your values are too abrupt. They don't make a lot of sense, and then it sort of gives your drawing more of a lower quality of a look. Okay? Alright, so for the sake of this video, I probably have easily another hour working on this. So my advice to you now at this point is you would continue your tonal pursuit. I would say at this point the egg is in pretty good shape. I would darken completely the entire background, and then once I'm done with the background, I would come back to my cast shadow, and most likely I would add another couple layers of 6B into it to make it more darker so it stands out. And then once I'm done with the background, the cast shadow, I would come back to my egg and then really spend probably a little bit more time making the values in here just a little bit more softer and more streamlined. Okay? So from this juncture, I would just continue going at it. Observation skills, assessing, and you guys couldn't see me doing it, but every so often I'm also kind of taking a step back, even though I still have my pencil out here, but I'm kind of standing up more straight, and just looking at it, and then looking at my object. Okay, so the other things that you can do is you can take a break from this drawing, come back with fresh eyes, and then really look at the shape of your egg. And so, like, I'm still not entirely happy with how the nose of it is over here on this side, so I'm still kind of making it more and more narrow, but overall it's egg shaped, and it doesn't look like a golf ball or a lacrosse ball, so that's working for me. And then I would darken all this in and get rid of all these back and forth strokes. Okay, well, thanks for watching, and I hope that just kind of seeing the starting of this will help you get started, and then the rest is more based on just slowly tuning it up and getting things to fall in place. Alright guys, well, thanks for watching. Good luck to you, and have fun.